Welcome to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello, welcome to the 94th episode of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Today we are joined by KU alum Ryan Colaianni. He's the Chief Communications Coordinator, or Officer, at BPT. He's based out of Nashville, but he's actually in Dallas working remotely. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. Yes, the joys of being on the road.
So how is life as a Chief Communications Officer? I was looking at your profile, and I think you're approaching about your 6-year anniversary at BPT, but it looks like you've kind of taken on new responsibilities. It looks like crisis communications have been a big part of your focus. So how is life at BPT?
Yeah, it's good. We're a niche, don't tell my CEO this, agency. We like to think of ourselves as a marketing and communication services firm. But I run the communication side of the house. And so we're in a niche spot in the fact that we solely work in healthcare, and the majority of our clients are hospitals and hospital systems. Healthcare is our focus. We have a team of about 20 on my group. So doing a lot of crisis management, do a lot of business of healthcare pieces of crisis management. So think mergers and acquisitions. We do a lot of labor relations work, those types of things. And then we do the positive PR as well for executive visibility and elevating profile of hospitals all over the country. And so our entire company is about 170 folks, but I run the communication side, but we do all things from branding and creative and advertising and analytics and paid media and all that type of stuff. So it's been an interesting space to get into from healthcare. Healthcare was not my background when I came here 6 years ago. I was in DC doing all things crisis on all types of corporate issues, but found my way to Nashville, and it's been a great 6 years and a great place to live. Nashville's a cool town.
And with that crisis emphasis, I was a PR director for a while. We had a few crises. What is kind of your first rule about crisis? To me, it was always like, well, first of all, is this an actual crisis? Do you have like a definition for what qualifies?
Yeah, it's almost like it's a great question. It's almost like you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. Most organizations, particularly as a consultant like we are, call us and they think everything's a crisis. I'd say 90% of the things that we deal with are what we call issues. I think crisis, more from a definition perspective, I would think is something that's almost, it's immediate. It's something that you need to jump into that hour to respond. At the beginning of my career, you had 8 hours, 12 hours, a little bit more time as we were more broadcast and print focused. Now we're all focused on kind of how this conversation is trending online and on social. So I think that's evolved. But yeah, I think most of the issues I work on are typically kind of things you have time to prepare for. Crises are things that are just unexpected, and you have to kind of jump in that moment. It is a little bit tricky to kind of guide clients to not overreact. Because sometimes you can draw a lot more attention to the issue if you do so. The number of CEOs I've had to counsel to hold back on doing things publicly when the conversation's winding down is pretty significant. Fortunately, we have a lot of tools now that are out there that can kind of help coach leadership and C-suite to understand how conversations are trending so that we can take appropriate action and not overreact and overcorrect.
And you talk about those conversations, consulting like the C-suite. Did it take you a while to kind of, build that credibility, or did you feel confident right away that, hey, I've got this? Or I know that's always kind of a give and take.
Yeah, no, it's certainly something you have to grow into. Even in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years of my career, it's something I've gotten very comfortable with. But I worked at a firm called Edelman for 10 years prior to joining BPT. And I was working across all types of industries, oil and gas. I worked US Airways and American merger. I did work with Under Armour. I did work with Samsung when they were getting sued by Apple. So all of these different types of issues. And usually you are supported by other team members that may be more senior as you're growing in your career to kind of have those candid conversations with C-suite. You may just be in the room to provide an insight or two, or to own a piece of a presentation. Now, in the last 5 to 10 years, it's my show. And so you have to make sure that what you're counseling is right. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, kind of, am I making the right recommendation? But the fact that I've done this so many times, I've seen it play out, provides that confidence. But no, it's something that you grow into. There were a lot of times back in the day where I was very nervous to walk into a C-suite or walk into a university president's office or an athletic director's president's office or athletic director's office to counsel them. But over time, you have enough experience to draw on where you can share relevant examples. Hey, I saw this 5 years ago. This is what happened. This is how I think it'll play out here. And obviously, you have to kind of play to the individual as well. As a consultant, you're working with a lot of different personalities. So it can range within your existing just a single client to every CEO being different or every C-suite being different. So you get a good understanding pretty quick about kind of what their personality is like and how that may impact how you counsel. There's some CEOs that frankly don't listen to advice, and after a time or two, you understand, you push back and recognize, okay, this is going to be one of those things where it's going to be a very transactional relationship, and then you have the great relationships with executives that truly care and truly want to know and want your best counsel. I'll always tell my clients, as an outside consultant, you are not getting your best value if I am not pushing you to do something that you're uncomfortable with. Otherwise, you could just hire somebody to have that person sit in your organization and you can tell them what to do every single day. So it's something you definitely grow into as from a career perspective. I've had an amazing opportunity to work on some really exciting things across my career that allows me to bring that expertise to the healthcare space and the hospital space.
Now, do you or members of your team, sounds like you probably have to do a lot of research in advance on these clients. I mean, is that something you do personally, or do you have team members that kind of do a lot of the prep work?
Yeah, I'll do a lot. So there's a couple of ways I would think about that. One, yeah. So let's say we have a new opportunity and it's a merger between two hospitals and they're in two different geographic places. There'll be some just institutional knowledge that I have just because our company has worked with probably over 30% of the nation's hospitals over the history of the firm. That allows us to have some really smart insights. But from a research perspective, I'm going to look at Google News. I'm using AI. I'm looking at social. I'm doing some of that. I'm just on my phone or looking at my laptop during the day, but I'm also having team members from my communications who pull together kind of reports. Here's some of the key insights I've seen. 6 months ago, they had a strike with nurses, and this is how they responded, and those types of things. Or this CEO is new to the role, and they came from this organization, and this is how they like to talk about themselves. So all of that research is essential. I think it really depends on the types of engagements we're working on. In a crisis situation, I may get a call, and we may be engaged within the next 24 hours. So we don't have a whole lot of time to get up to speed. We'll do that with the client directly. We do what we call in-depth interviews, where we'll talk to the CEO, we'll talk to board members, we'll talk to community partners to understand the situation at hand and then develop a strategy. But we're constantly looking at secondary research, looking at social, those types of things, just to understand kind of what's going on and what intel can we provide. And a lot of times we'll get an email from a prospect that has an immediate need, and we quickly Google the organization and understand kind of why they're calling us, because there might be something out there.
So you talked about the research and interviewing. I would assume you developed some of those skills at KU, or did this come after KU?
No, it definitely came before. So my path at KU is a little non-traditional from a J school perspective. So I came into KU thinking I was going to be a sports writer. Frankly, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I wanted to be on SportsCenter. This is when SportsCenter used to be good, kids, 20, 30 years ago, back in the 90s, and actually showed highlights. But I thought that's what I wanted to do. So I came into the J school and I started working for the Cans in my first semester, my freshman year. I covered the men's golf team my freshman year. I covered the baseball team my second semester. By my sophomore year, I was covering the football team and traveling the country. I covered men's basketball for a year. I worked for the Journal World and worked for the Topeka Capital Journal, those types of things. So I developed kind of the interview skills through that. But when I was going through my J school journey, I thought I was going to be news and information. But sophomore year, I decided, and I don't even know if news and information is still how you talk about your degrees. I decided that, I don't know if I am going to be able to make it from a career perspective as a journalist. So I dual emphasized within the J school in strategic communications as well as news and information. And so that kind of allowed me to kind of give me some additional options when I graduated. I still did freelance journalism when I graduated, but I was also working at large agencies like Edelman, working at DC trade associations before that, where I would cover events that newspapers didn't necessarily want to send a reporter to because it was too expensive. So I worked for Newsday in DC when the Roger Clemens steroid hearings were happening in Washington. I would cover Drexel or Villanova basketball when they would come to DC to play Georgetown or something along those lines. I would cover the New York Mets when they came and played the Washington Nationals for MLB.com. So I still kind of stuck with that. I talk really fast, so I move really fast. I think that's one thing that the J school really taught me that it applies to my work today, particularly as a crisis communicator and a communicator at large. Just having the ability to move fast, to decipher information quickly, to understand kind of what messages are going to resonate. My news and information side of the house, the journalism side, as well as the strategic communications expertise I got from KU, is incredibly invaluable to my work every single day, 20 plus years later.
Yeah, I think those two things definitely work together. News information, like you said, and the strat
Yep.
comp. And timing wise, if my math's right, you graduated probably right before KU's Orange Bowl season, and then
I
the
got
national title.
unlucky.
Or did
Yeah.
you like? Oh, were you there?
I got unlucky. I graduated in 07.
Okay.
But I was fortunate in a couple of ways. One, my now wife we graduated the same year as undergrad, but she was getting her master's in accounting in the business school. So she stuck around for a year after. So I tried to stay in Lawrence as long as possible after graduation. So I was in Lawrence for the entire Orange Bowl season. We actually went to the Orange Bowl and found our way down to Miami. I don't know how we could afford it back then. I was doing temping and interning and those types of things. And then she was still there. I had moved to DC in January of 2008, but she was there. So I came back to Lawrence for the North Carolina game in the Final Four, and then was in DC for the Memphis game. So I did miss, as I guess, technically as while I was in school, but was still able to experience the amazing year that 2008 was for KU athletics.
And I know you shared a photo of you and your wife, and I think I saw you were also at the 2012 tournament.
Yes. So I've been we have not missed a Final Four since 08. We were there in 2012 in New Orleans when they lost to Kentucky in the championship game. We were there in 18 when they lost to Villanova in the Final Four. And then fortunately, being in Nashville, we were able to drive to the 22 Final Four. It's a shorter drive, but also a longer drive than I would have thought as somebody who was new to Nashville at the time. About an 8-hour drive from Nashville to New Orleans. Brought our kids with us who were 3 years old at the time. They didn't go to the games. We were able to get a babysitter while we were down there, but they got to go to all the pregame stuff with the Alumni Association and all those types of things. So I was able to see that one, and I was able to be at the Liberty Bowl in Memphis a couple of years ago too. So we definitely travel. We will not miss another Final Four. At least that's my goal ever, because they are so much fun. The people you run into that you haven't seen in years or even decades. I don't even really tell people that we're going to Final Four because I know I'm just going to run into them if they are there, just because they're such a great event. And we've been fortunate to go to some cool cities, New Orleans twice for KU and San Antonio, where everything's kind of consolidated. You could walk everywhere. That might be a little bit different if we went to a Final Four in Dallas or something like that. That's a little bit further away from downtown.
And you mentioned the Alumni Association, and I think you've had a long history working with them. Weren't you like the DC kind of their network leader there for a while?
Yeah, I led the DC chapter when I was in town, did that for about 10 years. Great way just to meet people. The Alumni Associations do an amazing work. I had the opportunity to sit on their national board of directors for 5 years as well. The leadership under Heath Peterson has been incredible. The alignment that the Alumni Association has with the university side and athletics for all the events that they put on. It was just a great way to stay connected, especially in DC, where I think it's one of the top 5 alumni markets for KU, and a lot of journalism grads there, whether folks that are working in the journalism or also have ended up working on Capitol Hill or those types of things. So it was a great way to stay connected. A lot of my friends that I went to school with KU ended up there, but they had about 6,000 alums in the DC metro area, which more than you would think. And I'm a guy who grew up in the DC area, so I know it well. And it was it's a great way to stay connected. I encourage anybody, when you graduate, whatever city you end up in, find a local KU chapter, even if it's just to go to a watch party for a basketball or a football game. But most of these chapters are doing some other events. KU Libraries comes to cities all over the country. They're doing networking events and those types of things, coffees. So it doesn't always have to be about athletics, but I've been very fortunate to stay connected with the university through my time with both the Alumni Association in DC and then the national board until a couple of years ago. It allowed me to get back to campus a couple times a year, which was always fun. And I'm gonna convince my wife to get on the board at some point, just so we can have an excuse to come back 3 times a year.
So as you know, you're from DC. So what's your KU story? Are you from a family of Jayhawks, or how does one get from DC to Lawrence, Kansas?
Yeah, it's pretty weird. I had zero connection. I had never been to the state of Kansas until I started looking at schools. So I thought I wanted to be a sports writer or a sports broadcaster. And so essentially in 2003, I started looking. That's when I graduated from high school, looking at the top 10 schools of journalism across the country. And I pretty much applied to all of them. So I was looking at Syracuse, I was looking at Florida, I was looking at Indiana, I looked at that school to the east of Lawrence, and actually visited that school the day before I visited KU. And I went to that school And you go through there, and they wouldn't let you work for the student newspaper until you were junior.
Hmm.
I went through the kind of the meeting with the admissions representative from the J school at Mizzou, and there was probably 30 other people in our group. I go to Lawrence that night, so we drive from Columbia to Lawrence. And again, this is April of 2003. And my dad and I come down Mass Street, and we're trying to find a restaurant to eat, and every single restaurant we go to is packed. Everybody's just staring at the TVs. And I grew up a Georgetown fan. I grew up as a huge college basketball guy. And we're going to these restaurants, and we can't find a place. We finally find a spot, and we realize what's happening. And this was the evening that Roy Williams had come back to do the banquet for the basketball team after he had accepted the North Carolina job. And I was like, well, if they care about basketball this much to be watching this banquet on TV, this might be the place. And the next day I visited the J schools, me and another woman from South Dakota getting the tour. I could work for the Cans in my freshman year. And I mentioned earlier, I was able to do that. I was able to walk into Allen Fieldhouse, and I played high school basketball. I touched the rim at the Fieldhouse. I was able to go out there and walk on the floor. I don't know how, I don't think security is quite the same way as it was 25 years ago. It just felt like the right place. And, the guy who had no connection to Kansas, I was able to get involved in a lot of different things. I joined a fraternity my freshman year. I worked for the Cans in my freshman year. I was a new student orientation assistant for a year over a summer. So I was able to kind of have these different groups. I did a radio show on KJHK. So I had these different groups of things that I just did. And it really worked out well. For a guy who had no connection to Kansas, it ultimately became a second home to me. I met my wife there. My son's middle name is Lawrence. Like, it's an incredibly special place to us. And I'm so fortunate to have somehow stumbled upon KU. I think the funniest part is that I was a huge college basketball guy growing up. I wanted big time athletics where I was going. And the other schools that I applied to, 3 of the 4 in the Final Four that year are schools I applied to: Marquette, Syracuse, and Kansas. So I should have picked the bracket that year based on where I was applying to go to school.
That would be a great strategy. I never thought about that. So, with your role at BPD, I noticed, you've had a couple senior VP positions, executive VP. Now, were those positions you pursued, or did the leadership team reach out to you and say, "Hey, Ryan, we think you're ready for the next challenge"? Or how did those develop? Yeah,
it's interesting, especially within kind of an agency. I worked at Edelman prior to BPD, and that's an agency that's the biggest of the big. It's the largest PR agency in the world. 60 plus offices. Had unbelievable experience working on some of the biggest things that you read about when I was there. And I started as an account executive. So they had kind of 2 levels or 1 level below that. So I was essentially an entry level position. And over the years was able to kind of advance through the ranks to senior vice president, where I was leading the higher education department, working with universities that were navigating Title IX issues or athletics issues. But I mean, from an agency perspective, I think even the niche ones like BPD and even the larger ones, the roles either present themselves because there is a immediate need, whether we won a new client or we expanded work on a new client. And that allows you to kind of grow through the ranks from a title perspective. You kind of take on the responsibilities before you may get recognized with that new title. With BPD, I was recruited to that firm to essentially formalize their crisis communications practice. They had a very niche communications team that focused it only on negotiations between health plans and insurance companies and health systems. But they wanted to broaden it out. They wanted to do M&A work. They wanted to do labor negotiations issues. So I got hired for that role as a team of 1 and grew that from there. Eventually took over the entire strategic communications practice, took over that payer provider group that I mentioned. Now we're a team of about 20 within a firm of 170. So some of these roles present themselves as a natural place to be, where I was leading a department to being part of a management team. That certainly changes your dynamic and your focus. I wish I could still do client work 100% of my time, but I'd say about half my time is focused on business development now. I think particularly as you get more senior in your career, if you decide you are an agency person, and I think I'm an agency lifer just because I love the pace, there's something new every day. The people that are going to succeed are the ones that not only do exceptional client work and exceptional client counsel, but also almost serve as a business unit within that company, that are able to drive revenue, that are able to drive relationships to land new clients, those types of things. So some of those opportunities come organically to grow within agencies, and a lot of that as you start your career, and even to become a senior person within an agency, is largely determined based on the success you have within client opportunities and how well you provide work. When you get to that senior level, the continual growth that's required it's essential to kind of have revenue in mind in an agency perspective. So it kind of takes a little bit of a mindset shift. It is more of a sales focused job, but it doesn't feel like sales because you're selling yourself. You're not selling, widgets or something along those lines. You're selling your expertise to clients.
And as you mentioned, you and your wife have two 6-year-old twins. With your workload, the travel load, do you still have time, for that work-life balance, or is that still kind of a challenge?
It's a challenge, particularly during the week. I'm on the road probably, I don't know, 40 weeks a year.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite a bit. Sometimes I'm able to do day trips, and so I'm only gone for a day or a night or two. Sometimes it's longer. But I, obviously want to make sure we balance that on the weekends and those types of things. If there are things that are happening, recitals and those types of things, kindergarten graduations, like I'm not going to miss those. So working with my wife very closely to kind of ensure that I have that line of sight as to what might be coming. The hard part is, particularly in an agency, is I don't know where I may be 10 days from now. There's some times where I won't know where I'm going to be 2 days from now. When I was at Edelman, I got a call on a Saturday and I was in Morocco on Sunday night.
Wow.
So things like that happen. But you have to have a supportive spouse. You have to have a family that understands that this is kind of the nature of the role. And if that's something that frankly you feel like may not be for you, that's okay. You don't have to be on the road every single week. It may limit some of your options from a growth perspective, but we still need people at the senior level in my company that do great client work and aren't on the road every single week. And so there are options, I think, as you're growing and within your career, working together with your management team within the company that you're working for, just to be clear and transparent about what you need. And if you're doing great work, they're going to find a way to make sure that they keep you, because it's hard to find good talent, and make sure that kind of you're happy and you have that balance that you need to succeed.
It looks like your children are very comfortable wearing crimson and blue. They look
They
that's
are. Landon, my son. His middle name is Lawrence, so they're twins. And that was fun. Now they're at the age where they tell you what they want to wear, but back in the day, we could pretty much determine what they were wearing. But they love the Jayhawk. It's a great mascot for kids. We got them all the books and all those types of things. My daughter loves it. My wife was a Crimson girl at KU, and so she wants to do the same thing that mommy did when she comes to school. So they love going to the games. They've been to Allen Fieldhouse. They've been to Memorial Stadium. They've been to bowl games. I mentioned they've been to a Final Four. Didn't go to the game, but they were there. And so they love kind of coming and seeing that. And they love watching on TV with us now. And now that they're kind of old enough to understand what's happening, you can see them rooting for the Jayhawks. And that's something I hope will continue. I hope they both end up there. We'll see. We got another 12 years to figure that out. But I would love to, again, have more excuses to visit Lawrence. We'll come for parents weekend and all that type of thing. We will not miss any of that if that's what happens.
Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to share your career story and family story. I have a few quick 5 questions. Hope these are fun for you. So I noticed you shared that photo from like your days of predicting football games. So were you known as the best football predictor on the UDK staff?
Oh, I don't know if I was the best,
Okay.
but there were some, that was a fun thing about the Kansas, just the group of reporters that we got to work with that just knew Big 12 football or Big 12 basketball. But we created that we essentially took the back page of the Kansan and made it kind of a pick'em and kind of a recap of what to expect for that weekend for college football or for Big 12 hoops. And that was really fun just to do that. I got to visit so many cool venues across the Big 12 and the old Big 12, some schools that don't exist anymore, like A&M, or even UT or OU. But I don't know if I was the best, but I certainly had a perspective on what was going to happen, and that's kind of the role. Particularly, it's no different than when you're talking to your friends about sports. When you're trying to be competitive, going up against some of the other guys that are writing for different sports across the Kansas, you want to make sure that you're up there on the leaderboard.
I recognize one of the names, Daniel Burke. Now with
Yes. And he's at KU still. Love Daniel. Him and I text regularly. He's one of the best people, and him and I had the chance to cover basketball and football together for a couple of years, and still stayed in touch. He came to my wedding. Love Daniel Burke and love what he's doing with KU athletics.
So, Ryan, do you have a favorite story that you wrote for the Daily Kansan? Is there one that was very memorable for you?
There's definitely memorable ones. There was one that I spent the most time on. This was, if they still do the kind of capstone news and info course where you kind of spend a semester working on a story. And I had Ted Frederickson's, he was my professor for that class. Unbelievable professor. Unfortunately, he's passed. But I worked an entire semester on a football story. So most of these kind of capstone stories are things about Lawrence or kind of big city news or administrative news. I worked on kind of the impact of kind of nutrition within football and what that means for student athletes after they graduate. So think of offensive linemen and how large those guys have to be just to succeed on the field and kind of what that means. And so I spent an entire semester on that, interviewing nutritionists across the country, even interviewing the coaching staff, interviewing players, and those types of things. So it's the longest time I spent on a story, and was fortunate to be rewarded. It was placed in the national competitions. I think I finished like 5th in the sports feature competition with the Hearst Awards that year. So that was a fun story. It took a lot of time, and then I loved this. The one thing that I loved for work for the Cans, and particularly for football or basketball, is the game would end and you'd have to have your story filed with quotes, 20 minutes later. So that made me kind of have to move really fast. Again, it's something that I use today. But those game stories were a lot of fun because you're writing your story the entire game and you're changing it as the game evolves until that whistle or buzzer happens. And then you got to fill it in with quotes and you're done 20 minutes after the game's over.
Yes. So you mentioned you worked new student orientation at KU. Do you remember what your go-to selling point was for KU? Did you have like one line that you always made sure to share with those students and family?
I don't know if it was a line, but I think my background was so unique. The fact that I didn't know a soul. So I wanted to make sure that at least when I was a new student orientation assistant, to meet kids that may have been in a similar position, that may be kind of a little bit antsy, not sure what they're getting into. They grew up on the East Coast, they grew up on the West Coast, and they didn't have a connection to Kansas. I just wanted them to feel comfortable, to understand that there is a way and a path forward, that you're coming into this new environment where you may not know as many people as guys that grew up together in Wichita or in Overland Park. But making sure that they felt comfortable. So I think that was kind of my role that I like to play as one of the 20 new student orientation assistants for that summer, just so folks that may be coming from out of state, that don't have the connection, would ultimately feel like this is the right place for them to be.
I know it's early in your career. You're a communications associate for the American Sports Fishing Association.
It exists.
How good a fisherman were you, or are you?
I'm not, and I was not. It was a interesting role to end up. And I think as a guy that grew up in DC, you should not be surprised that there is an association for everything in that town. And the Sport Fishing Association existed. And this is how unique DC is. That's not just the Sport Fishing Association for all fishermen. No, they represented the commercial or the recreational sports fishermen. So you and me that go out and buy stuff and go down to the pond, not the commercial association. There's another association for that. But when I came back to DC, I was just trying to find a job. And I was working there. I was applying for a bunch of associations. My dad was an association guy. He went to Georgetown and worked in the same association for 30 plus years and ran that association. So I kind of understood the business of kind of, as a member organization, what you need to do in DC to advocate for that industry. And it was convenient that I got to be involved somewhat in sports. They had a huge convention every year and still do, in Orlando, and when I was there in Las Vegas. And so Disney and ESPN would be there. What is now NBC Sports Network at the time was called the Outdoor Channel, and Versus, they were there. So I still got to feel like I was being involved in sports, even though it was more of a traditional trade association. But it was me and my boss. It was a 2-person communications department. So we did everything: press releases, newsletters, social media platforms, website content, those types of things. It was a nice place to learn for kind of that first gig out of school, first real gig. I did internships and stuff like that, but first full-time job, to kind of see what you're comfortable with, see what works well, see where you're successful, and kind of bring those skills to your next role after that.
And the last question for Fast Five, I assume like when you're building a team, you're involved in the interviews. I know as career advisor, I'm always prepping students for interviews and doing mock interviews. So what's your go-to interview question? What's that one question you always like to ask job candidates?
Yeah, the biggest thing I want to know is I want to understand kind of how well you work on your feet, because there are, whether it's a junior role or a mid-level role or a senior role, there are going to be situations that you're going to be thrown in where you got to figure out the right thing quickly. So we do assignments. I think a lot of companies do this now, but we do assignments and essentially kind of have you create a communications plan based on a scenario we give you. And then we make the person come back and present it. So they get a couple of days to do it, and they send us a PowerPoint deck or something along those lines. But then we have them come in person and present it to us like they would have to do in a client situation. So seeing how natural a person is incredibly important. To see kind of what unique ideas and kind of their thought process is going to really kind of determine how well that person is going to succeed in the role. Another question I love to ask about pace. How quickly do you move? Everybody moves at different levels and different pace, but being comfortable with moving quickly is something that's critically important to my team. And so that's something that I usually probe on as well.
No, great questions. I'll have to keep those in mind. Hey, Ryan, I know you're extremely busy. Again, I appreciate your time. Always like to close with a little cheers. I know you're on the road, so you might not have your favorite Jayhawk mug with you, but hey, cheers to your career and keep up the great work.
Cheers, Rock Chalk. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ryan.